Heat check. Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa. Basketball.
Welcome into another episode of the Heat Check Hangout. I'm your host, Connor Hope, joined by my co-host, Riley Davis. And we are joined today by Heat Check bracketologist expert extraordinaire and Big East expert, Lukas Harkins, to help us break down the Big East heading into this 2022-2023 season. Lukas, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Looking forward to hanging out.
Riley, big news out of the preseason today. Emoni Bates gets off of the gun charges. He's going to be cleared to play. Does this change how you view anything about Emoni Bates heading into the season, or was this kind of just more of the same or more of a bump in the road than anything else?
In short, no. I will probably not be following much Eastern Michigan this year. I'll check in from time to time, see who's getting buckets between him and Noah Farrakhan, but I don't really see the EMU really factoring into the MAC equation or competing for an auto bid. I'm happy for Emoni. I mean, I did feel for him, just like kind of seeing his situation go so far south and the fall from grace, like with him being on the cover of Sports Illustrated when he was 15. Everybody knows that story and everything. I never want to like see someone fall so far and end up at rock bottom and not be able to get back up. So I'm glad that hopefully he'll get to play some basketball this year. But yeah, I can't say I'll be especially plugged in to what's going on at good old EMU.
That's it. That's our obligation to cover everything Emoni Bates. Lukas, we brought you in to talk about the Big East. It's the last of kind of the six high major conferences that we have left to talk about. Why don't we just start off and get your thoughts on what the Big East is going to look like, whether it's going to be an up year, down year, top heavy. What are you expecting out of the Big East this season?
Well, I think it's another really good year for the league. I think there's pretty good depth throughout. I think I wouldn't be that surprised if the top 8 or 9 teams are all competing for bids by mid-February, which is kind of where teams start to separate themselves. The bubble gets smaller from that point forward. But I think probably the top 8 or 9 are in the tournament contention. Really, the big question is who is that national title contender? It's been Villanova basically since the new Big East started. Whether that's still Nova in the mix is the question, and whether Creighton's ready to take that step into that elite territory this year will kind of determine how they're viewed nationally, I think. I think a lot of the national viewing is how many national title contenders you have. But overall, I think it's going to be a pretty deep league.
How about you, Riley? What are you expecting out of the Big East this year?
Yeah, I think, of course, everybody's talking about Creighton. They've been preseason darlings all year with very few people expressing much skepticism aside from our good buddy Jim Root over at Three Man Weave. So I'm not even as intrigued by Creighton. I should say I'm excited to watch them and see how it all shapes out. But I'm especially concerned and interested to see how Xavier performs and how Butler performs, just with those being the two splashiest hires from the conference. Maybe I could throw Seton Hall in there. I mean, I think you could say Shaheen Holloway, what he did at St. Peter's makes her a pretty splashy hire as well. But just with really two guys who are a bit more established with Sean Miller and Thad Matta, who have had success at the highest level coming to coach this conference at schools they have ties to. And I think, yeah, both are coming into rosters that are pretty well set up for immediate success. So that's what I'll be looking forward to the most with this conference.
You both mentioned how everyone's high on Creighton, and obviously, they've been listed in the top 10 on a bunch of preseason top 25s. I've seen them ranked as high as 5 or 6 heading into this year. That's a big jump for Creighton from last year. Everyone's talking about North Carolina and how they might be one of the 3 teams that receives number 1 overall votes in the preseason top 25, coming up from where they ended the year last year as kind of I think they were 16 in Ken Pom. They were 37 entering postseason play. Creighton finished the season at 50 on Ken Pom. A lot of that had to do with losing Ryan Nembhard towards the end of the year. But they still weren't really all that good, all that highly ranked with Nembhard. Lucas, are you buying into? I know we all kind of buy into Creighton is going to be good this year, but are you buying into that top 5, top 10 hype behind Creighton, considering all they have to do to improve from last year and bringing in, Baylor Shireman, and Francisco Farabello, and then just kind of a slew of freshmen?
So no and yes. I would say no on top 5, yes on top 10. I think they're probably in that 6 to 10 range for me coming into the year. I've always liked this freshman class. Ryan Nemhart was my pick for a long time to win freshman of the year last year in the Big East, coming into the year and then throughout it. I think he's a really talented floor general. They've got a lot there. Arthur Kaluma is probably the guy who takes that leap into being maybe a first-round draft pick this year, which has kind of been maybe the biggest knock on the Big East, honestly, over the last few years has been that lack of high NBA talent. I think Kaluma can maybe take that jump for them. I think Ryan Kalkbrenner's a top, maybe a fringe All-American this year. I think he's outstanding. He had a really offensive explosion down the stretch of last season. If he can continue that while being the best defensive big in the conference, that'll be huge for them. I think the thing that's gotten a little undersold for Creighton is losing Ryan Hawkins and Alex O'Connell. I mean, they were really the only two consistent three-point shooting threats for a program that has traditionally been pretty three-point oriented. So I think they'll definitely need Trey Alexander, Nemhart, Kaluma to shoot the ball a bit better this year. And that's where Shireman really makes a big play. I mean, he doesn't need to be the do-it-all star he was for South Dakota State, but if he can be as effective from beyond the arc as he was for them, that's going to be a huge step for Creighton to get really a high-profile shooter on the floor on the perimeter that I think puts them in that top 10 conversation.
Yeah, you mentioned three-point shooting. They were outside the top 300 in three-point percentage offense. And it's tough to look at three-point percentage offense year to year because a lot of it is, I don't want to say luck, but it's less predicated on kind of getting open and more on just making shots. Riley, when you're looking at this roster and Shireman is a great three-point shooter, what other players on this roster are you looking at as going to be kind of those consistent players to make threes for this team where they don't finish, outside the top 300 shooting just over 30%, where they can push closer to that kind of 35% mark? That really is the benchmark for a lot of people when considering national title contenders.
Yeah, I think sort of with all of Creighton's outlook, it comes down to what are these three sophomores going to do with Ryan Nemhart, with Arthur Kaluma, and with Trey Alexander. I think we've mentioned all of them but Alexander so far. And I think it's very likely that all three could make that sophomore leap that just, especially for us three who spend a large chunk of time doing team previews for the ALMANAC, and we've all done that before writing for the ALMANAC this summer. It's sort of like something that comes up a lot for those of us who cover the sport, is like that mystical sophomore leap that you're hoping guys can follow through on. And as far as the shooting aspect of that goes, I would expect Ryan Nemhart to be the one who is the most sure thing, who's going to shoot better. I think he shot 30 or 31% from three last year. And I would bet that number, 31% goes way up. Kaluma, I feel like he can probably make that leap as well. He hit 27 threes last year as a freshman, which kind of at his size and position is pretty good. But I would say from what I remember of watching him, even against Kansas, his form is maybe a little less pure looking than how Nemhart's would be. And then Alexander, I think, he seems to be the biggest wild card just in the sense that he only made 18 threes last year, 9 in conference play. Although he did hit 2 against Kansas, which was again, the game that I think has sort of spearhead a lot of this buzz around Creighton going into the year. But yeah, I think the good news about bringing in Shireman is, let's say, only Nemhart is he's the only one of that three who sort of makes that leap and becomes like a 35 to 38, 39% shooter, and Kaluma maybe and Alexander are both around 30% or something. Like, Shireman is a really good safety blanket to where, just with how deep his range is and how he's able to get his shot off, I think that should translate with he probably, maybe he doesn't shoot as many step backs or off the dribble threes as he did for the Jackrabbits, but I think just using him as a spot up threat, I can't see how he wouldn't be able to do that or run off screens. Like I don't see how he wouldn't be able to do that in the Big East.
And I'll add that adding Mason Miller really probably to the bench rotation for them is another, and Farabello for that matter, gives them more shooting in the second unit.
Yeah, when you first asked, he's someone like I wrote about him for Field of 68 Daily this week and kind of forget about him just because Creighton has so many dudes. Like when we were voting for our top 100 for the Almanac, I'm like, I don't even know how to rank these guys because, you know, a lot of with that big three sophomore class, you're trying to forecast who's going to break out, but any number of those three could emerge as Creighton's best player. And then you have Shireman, who's like the most proven guy, but he's stepping up a level. And so it's easy to see how Miller could get lost in the shuffle. But I think he's a legit 6'9", and just judging by his pedigree, judging by his bloodline, I mean, shooting is literally in his genealogy.
Yeah, and I was going to talk about Farabello because I think he kind of got lost in the shuffle at TCU. But he can shoot the three ball. And I think as a guard, you know, behind those three in Nembhard, Alexander, and Shireman, Farabello is going to get some nice run off the bench, especially given that he's a senior. And, you know, him and Shireman, they're the two most experienced players. You know, Kalkbrenner has been with the team. He's the kind of the most tenured at Creighton. But I like Farabello to have not necessarily a great season, but a pretty nice season compared to what he had with TCU. I didn't ask you, Riley, do you buy into the top, 5 or 6 hype, or do you have Creighton more in that kind of 6 to 10 range?
I also have them in that 6 to 10 range. Probably, I can't remember if I have them at 7 or 8, but somewhere in that range. So I am on the same page with as Lucas with that. And I think, again, going back to the Almanac, I don't know if this was Doster wrote the preview for the Big East, but I know Lucas was a bit of a consigliere for him in writing that. So I don't know if this was if Doster knew this or if Lucas, but one of y'all gets credit for this. But Creighton never once was in the top 40 in KenPom last year, which that's the biggest red flag to me to see. Like, I think they're capable of getting into, like, to be in a top 10 team this year, but that's the biggest red flag for me to expect them to be a national title contenders, that they didn't even crack the top 40 last year, and we're sort of banking on a team that's bringing probably 70% of its minutes back.
Yeah, I mean, you're banking on a lot of freshman to sophomore improvement, which can happen, but it might be a little bit more comfortable if it was 1 or 2 guys rather than kind of 3 plus a couple of freshmen off the bench that you're expecting all to contribute at a top 10 level. But I also have them at the back end of my top 10. We're talking about top 10 Big East teams, and it's not Villanova. Riley, when we talk about Villanova, obviously, I think, the loss of some of the players that they had last year, Colin Gillespie being the big one, Jermaine Samuels as well. That's a big part of why they're not in the top 10 conversation. But maybe even bigger is the fact that it's Kyle Neptune's first year at the helm. They don't have Jay Wright anymore, Hall of Fame coach. What are you expecting from Villanova? And I think more so in regards to what are you expecting from Villanova once Justin Moore comes back?
Yeah, I would say even before Justin Moore comes back, I expect Villanova to be a lock for the top 25 for probably most of the year. It wouldn't be totally surprising if they fall out at some point, but I would expect them to be somewhere in that 15 to 20, 25 range for most of the year. And I think they're a team that, as the offseason has wore on, I've completely changed my tune on. When Jay Wright first announced his retirement, and just considering how much they lost and how few guys, I don't think they didn't bring any transfers in again for a second straight season. And I was kind of like, yeah, this is probably, I'm sure Villanova will be a tournament team, but this is probably the end of them as a surefire top 25, top 15, Final Four type contender for a little while. But part of that, I think, was ignorance on my part with not realizing how well Kyle Neptune did at Fordham last year. Apologies to our A10 fans out there. I know y'all are fantastic fan bases, but I was not locked into the Fordham Rams at all last season. But seeing what he did there has me optimistic on his chances, and just watching what Mark Armstrong and Cam Whitmore did at the FIBA event this summer, those dudes are hoopers. Cam Whitmore is that guy, and I fully expect him to be once if he is assuming that he recovers quickly from this finger injury he has, like to push for an All-American team. I think he can be that good.
Lucas, this team, if anything, because I like the talent on this team, the known quantities, and I'll include Whitmore and Armstrong in the known quantities. They're probably going to be starting both of them in the starting five to start the season. Armstrong at the 2, Whitmore on the wing. The bigger question for me is the players off the bench. Obviously when Justin Moore comes back, they'll run at least 6 deep. But you've got Jordan Longino, Trey Patterson, Chris Arcidiacono. Who are you expecting of kind of that trio, plus maybe some of the other freshmen that they have coming in to have the biggest impact off the bench? Because I just can't see a team of that runs 6 deep competing that well, especially with the talent that you have at Creighton.
Yeah, of that group, Longino and Patterson are coming back. Big, high-profile recruits, probably in that same mold of just like they're ready for more minutes, ready for a leap. And that does dictate things off the bench, but they are not going to be in as much of pressure as some other rising returners in the country are. They're going to be probably the 6th and 7th man for a group. There's a really strong starting 5, in my opinion. Obviously, we already hit on Whitmore and Armstrong, but Caleb Daniels, I think, is a first-team All-Big East guy. Eric Dixon's really rock solid. Brandon Slater had moments where he looked great last year when he was healthy. In terms of that freshman class, I think you look to maybe who can really help out Armstrong at that lead guard spot this year. So obviously Arcidiacono is going to play some of those minutes, but then as a freshman, Angelo Brizzi's coming back. He's a redshirt freshman, redshirted last year, really kind of the prototype Villanova point guard, kind of rock solid, steady ball handler, can shoot the 3. Had a really big summer before he committed to Nova. And then another guy who had a really big summer before he committed to Nova, Brendan Austin, who I've said on several occasions is one of my favorite incoming freshmen in the country. I don't know if he'll necessarily play a ton of minutes this year, but I think he's that multi-year college player that's kind of slipped through the cracks in this freshman class for Nova that has 2 studs in Armstrong and Whitmore. I think he's going to be a multi-year guy that really threatens, that the rest of the Big East will not like. The deadly shot maker, really good from deep, has tremendous footwork, runs off screens. He's going to be really good in that inside-out action when Nova posts up their guards. I think that he's a really good piece that if he gets on, if he really catches up to speed quickly on the defensive end, can really help them on offense.
Behind those top 2, Lucas, is it safe to say that the next 2 teams are Xavier and UConn in some order?
I would do the opposite order, but those are my 3 and 4, yeah.
And why would you go with UConn over Xavier?
I think there's just been, I think the top end star is better. I think there's just Adama Sanogo gives you that proven player of the year type guy that gives them the edge. And they also have those rising talents that are really ready to take another step. And I think Tristan Newton is a really good player to add to the mix for them in that trying to replace RJ Cole, which is a tougher task than I think some have given, some have noted this offseason.
Riley, when you look at a team like UConn, traditionally, I feel like they've kind of done well when they've had that star guard that can really give them, even if it's not a ton of scoring, that can just give them a steady hand. How much do you trust Tristan Newton to do that for UConn this year compared to what you got from RJ Cole last year?
Yeah, I think, well, I'll start by saying that I actually have UConn over Nova in my projected Big East finish. I'd have them number 2 behind Creighton. And as far as Tristan Newton goes compared to like RJ Cole, I really don't know what to expect. I think it's definitely going to be, there could again be an adjustment going from the AAC, being at ECU, playing for bad teams for pretty much the entire his time at ECU. Those are like bottom dwellers of the AAC, up to a team that's expecting to compete not just in the Big East, but to hopefully go on a tournament run. But I think the good news is that even, let's say, if Newton's not able to sort of spearhead the offense or even initiate it, Hurley has a couple more bites at the apple where you have Jordan Hawkins who's looking to make a pretty big leap. Even I know it's it's a different role. But I think Naheem Aline, he's not going to be the type of guard that creates for himself, but he is a fantastic ancillary piece on the perimeter who can run off screens, bomb away, and cash a bunch of them. And I think, like, it seems like UConn might have lacked that a little bit, like sort of that off-ball sniper who can be pretty reliable if the offense gets stagnant to command some gravity, open up the rest of the floor. And judging by like our ALMANAC prognostications, Aline's projected to come off the bench, which I think speaks a lot to Hurley's confidence in both Newton and Hawkins, which would give me a good amount of optimism if I was a UConn fan, because I think Naheem Alim's a stud. Was a pretty underrated pickup for them. So
I have UConn ahead of Xavier as well. I just didn't want to put too much stock in my heart rather than my head.
I love your hat too.
Yeah.
Can we talk about how UConn has like just crazy length on the perimeter too? Like if you look at their projected backcourt, you got Tristan Newton who's 6'5", you have Jordan Hawkins who's 6'5", on the wing you have Andre Jackson 6'6", Naheem Aline 6'4" coming off the bench. I think it's like Hurley clearly has a type, and he's been doing pretty well with these big guards, and I think that tells me we could see an improvement on these last 2 years' defense too, where that's kind of been UConn's calling card. I didn't mean to cut you off, Connor, but didn't want to gloss over that.
Go ahead. It's definitely much more intelligent than anything I would put out there. I wanted to switch to the other team though. Xavier and their first year head coach Sean Miller obviously had a previous stint with Xavier, so I put first in quotes, but took them to 3 A-10 regular season titles before making the jump to Arizona. Xavier loses Paul Scruggs and Nate Johnson, but they the only transfer they bring in is Sully Boom out of UTEP. But they have a really good front court in Zach Fremantle and Jack Nungy, and you have Colby Jones on the wing. Lucas, what can we expect from this Xavier team, not only just in terms of style of play, but also maybe in terms of how they deal with perhaps taking a step back at the point guard position, but still having that elite front court?
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I don't know, because I think Colby Jones is their best player. I'll put that out there. I think that he's an all-conference guy. I think he's going to take a lot of ball handling responsibility this year, in kind of a faux point guard role at times. He was awesome. I think people get a little bit hung up on how good he was in the NIT. He won NIT MVP, but that wasn't just a run of nice games at the NIT. I think he hit double figures in 10 straight games to end the season. I think he's really coming on in a big way and will be probably the star of the team this year, even with, as you mentioned, a really good front court. With Jack Nungy coming back, and if Zach Fremantle can get back to what he was 2 years ago, that'll also really help things. And in terms of the backcourt, I'm not maybe a step back with not having Paul Scruggs, but I think they're deeper. Des Claudet and Cam Kraft coming in as freshmen are both crafty guys. Good. Cam Kraft could really score it. Claudet can really get downhill. He's another one of those bigger guards, as we alluded to with UConn having. I think there's a lot of pieces here. And I think really the thing that's held Xavier back recently hasn't really been the talent or necessarily even how they performed most of the season. It's just that they've fumbled down the stretch for 3 straight years. And now they bring in a coach who's had lots of experience winning in March, lots of experience winning deep into March. And I think that will give them that push that they need to just kind of finish off the season and make sure that they make that NCAA tournament and probably as a single-digit seed.
Riley, what are your expectations from Xavier this year? Because I know in the past we've had somewhat high expectations that they failed to deliver on. But again, you bring in Sean Miller, who's seen success at Xavier, granted at the A-10 level, not the Big East level. What are you expecting from Xavier this season?
Yeah, I think somewhere between a top 30, top 40 team with a top 25 ceiling. I think Lucas hit the nail on the head with how deep that front court is, and just what a luxury it is to have 2 guys in Fremantle and Nungy who you can get the ball to on the block and let them go to work. Both of them can score. And I think it's kind of ironic that, similarly to when Sean Miller left Arizona, he left the cupboard pretty full for Tommy Lloyd, and Travis Steele kind of did the same as well. Like, Sean Miller got a pretty good situation. I want to say Cam Kraft even committed to Steele and when he was still the coach of Xavier. And I mean, I think Kraft was a top 75 recruit, good size at 6'6", like really high power scorer. And again, he's like projected as the 7th man in the rotation right now per the Almanac. And I think that indicates well that he's going to net some pretty good rewards early on, and maybe would even prove himself, both he and Claude, is a little underrated in recruiting sites and everything. So I'm pretty fascinated to see how Boom transfers up to the Big East, just because he was like such a stat sheet stuffer at UTEP. And I mean, I've only really watched his highlights, and he looks pretty electric, pretty good athlete. But yeah, and so those would be my expectations. Top 25-ish team, but a lot of top 30 to top 40 team with the top 25 ceiling and a lot of high upside pieces there.
That sounds about right to me. When I'm looking at the Big East, and this is where everything kind of goes awry, I'm looking at 5 or 6 teams that I want to throw into this next tier. You've got Providence, Seton Hall, Butler, St. John's, and then I might throw Marquette into that mix too. Lucas, you're giving a kind of inquisitive look. Do you disagree with that?
I was confused when you went to 6.
Oh, yeah. It's my inability to count, Lucas. 4 or 5, not 5 or 6.
That was my only inquisitive look.
Lucas, who would you put at the top of that group of 5?
I think Providence deserves to be there in the preseason. I think Ed Cooley, absolutely hit lightning in a bottle last season with an unbelievable transfer class, and he's going to pretty much look to do the same again this year. No Al Durham, no Nate Watson, no Noah Horkler, no AJ Reed, no Justin Anaya. Like, all those guys are gone this year. And those were all huge pieces. They bring back Jared Bynum, who was, I believe, a second-team all-conference guy last year. He'll run the show, but a lot of otherwise really new pieces. And Ed Crosswell's going to take a bigger jump. He was awesome in per-minute statistics last year, but there's a different story between being that second guy behind Nate Watson and being the guy. But I think Ed Cooley proved last year that he can win with a transfer class. He got a really good transfer class in. I think if you look at the rest of this kind of grouping in the league, it's a lot of new coaches. Obviously, Sean Miller's a little bit ahead of the curve here, but then there's Thad Matta's a new coach in the current day Big East that I think, and same with Shaheen Holloway at Seton Hall, where I think you give the edge, at least in the preseason, to a guy who knows how to win in the new Big East, has done it, did it last year, won a regular season title. Like, I think that's the team to kind of go on in a mix of really jumbled, tight teams that I think are all capable of competing for the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, Riley, when it comes to Providence, obviously last year they were the team where the results didn't match the analytics. Like, they just kept winning despite the fact that the analytics they looked decent, and tournament caliber, but they didn't look at quite as good as Providence's win-loss results looked. You're looking at a team that's probably going to start, Jared Bynum and Ed Crosswell, and then 3 transfers. What are your expectations in terms of, can Ed Cooley put it all together, considering that a lot of the factors in why they were so good last year are gone?
Yeah, I think, again, I wouldn't be surprised if this Providence team ends up being a top 25 team. I think that's their ceiling. I don't think they'll make it back to the Sweet 16 necessarily, or kind of go on the run they did last year. But, there's a lot of things I love about this team. I love Bryce Hopkins. I think he is in line for a massive leap and a massive increase in usage. I think he's a different player from Ben Bentil, but I've either written or said at some point that I could see him being kind of the most prolific, like, stretch 4 type role since Bentil was at Providence. And I think he's a bit more of a point forward, at least judging by his high school tape, as opposed to Bentil, who was just like a sniper pick and pop threat. But yeah, but I think Hopkins can be a stud. I also really like Corey Floyd. I thought that dude was nasty at Peach Jam in 2021, and was kind of surprised that he ended up redshirting at UConn last year. But he's a high upside kid, former top 100, top 90-ish recruit who gives them sort of that X factor off the bench with a little more pedigree than, well, I guess Bryce Hopkins fits that mold as well as a former 4-star top 50 kid, but a little bit more pedigree than maybe they've had in recent years. The other things I love Taylor Swift, so a team that's going to use her to really galvanize the fan base. I'll always stand behind that. I also love God. I am a man of faith, so shout out to Providence and the the spiritual forces at work helping them go on their winning streaks.
Another team that's going to be pretty heavily reliant on, at least maybe not necessarily as heavily in the starting rotation, but maybe it could be, is this Seton Hall team. You know, Shaheen Holloway comes in, brings in Alamir Dawes from Clemson, Casey Ndefu. He brought with him from St. Peter's, Dre Davis from Louisville, Femi Odukale from Pitt. But he also managed to retain Kadari Richmond, Tyree Samuel, Trey Jackson, Jameer Harris, Alexi Yetna. What are you expecting, Riley, from this Seton Hall team, considering the fact that it is the toughest competition that Shaheen Holloway will face as a coach in the Big East, but also that they have, you know, up and down, they have 9 guys who averaged 18 or more minutes per game last year. So they have the experience from a player perspective, even at the highest end. You know, Ndefu's the only transfer coming in that, well, and Ndaye is also coming in from a mid-major, but in terms of their rotation, they all have that high major experience as well. It's not a bunch of mid-major players coming in.
Yeah, I think Seton Hall probably, I'll go ahead and say it, I think they have the greatest variance in the league. And I think Shaheen can keep their floor high enough to where they're not going to be in the basement. Like, they're going to be better than Georgetown. They're going to be better than DePaul. They should be better than St. John's and Marquette, I think. But it wouldn't be that big of, it wouldn't be that big of a surprise if they were sort of just like on par with St. John's and Marquette and not a tournament team, not really on the bubble picture. But I also wouldn't be all that surprised if they, you know, gave Providence and Xavier a run for their money trying to contend for that top 4 spot, because I'm intrigued by this roster because you got a guy, I don't even think you mentioned Kadari Richmond, who, again, another pedigree kid, top 70 recruit, played at Brewster Academy and sort of got outshined by Terrence Clark when he was playing there, but someone who flashed a lot at Richmond or at Syracuse his freshman year before having his moments last year, but still being pretty inconsistent and not giving quite that, like, making that sophomore leap that we already talked about with Creighton. But you know, he's someone who I think fits that whole Shaheen Holloway like toughness mindset, and he's really good defender and everything. And I mean, Dre Davis is another wild card, someone who I was pretty impressed with his freshman year at Louisville. And he sort of looked like one of those gems that Chris Mack found, brought a good bit of athleticism and also had a pretty decent looking 3-point shot before his production kind of fell off a cliff with like the entire Louisville roster last year. So I'm really interested to see how he can bounce back. And then Odukale is another one of those kids who was like one of the few bright spots on a really bad high major team and had some moments there too, to where it seems like the guys who Holloway went after, they fit some of that Northeastern toughness mold that he had and had such great success with at St. Peter's. But how is it going to all come together? Is he going to be able to, is there going to be enough scoring? I think that's the biggest question, like enough scoring, enough shooting to compete in the Big East.
Lucas, is it safe to call this team somewhat of a high floor, low ceiling team? Like, I feel like given the experience they have, given Shaheen Holloway's coaching style, given the fact that, you know, they're not going to be, he's not going to have to coach players up as much as some other new head coaches will heading into this season. I feel like their floor in the, maybe not in terms of the number finish in the Big East, but just how competitive they can be in the Big East is relatively high. But I would hesitate, as with Providence, I think they can compete with that top 4 and maybe even and finish in the top 3 or 4. But Seton Hall, I just don't see that same ceiling with.
Yeah, I think from a competitive standpoint, I agree. I think that comes partly with style of play, because I would be very surprised if this isn't a very good, if not excellent, defensive team. I think they have the pieces to be really, really good on the defensive end of the floor. And that's anchored with Richmond as a really good point of attack defender. They bring in Nadefi, really, really good, talented small ball guy who obviously coach is familiar with. And Tyrese Samuel has some of those interior defense as well. Obviously, they're going to look different. No Ike Biago in the front. But I think that they're going to be really, really good defensively. And I think this season kind of comes down to their backcourt offensively. And if that's Gary Richmond, who had moments, he had some really big games last year. He also scored 4 points or fewer on 9 occasions. And I think that should be tricky to overcome. And then Almir Dawes, is he ready to go from being that kind of 10 to 12 points a game guy to getting closer to 15 this year? I think is a good question. And for Riley, he brought up Trey Davis. Tay Davis, his younger brother, is actually a guy I really like, incoming freshman from Warren Central in Indiana. I think he's a really talented player, really fluid, 6'5", wing who's got a lot of talent. I think that he could play solid minutes this year for them.
Shout out Indiana high school basketball, baby. I know Lucas has all the scoop on that.
Moving on from Seton Hall, I think the team that I wouldn't even say intrigued, because I don't know if they're going to be very good, but the team that I can't wait to see how it gets put together is what Mike Anderson's going to do with this St. John's roster. They bring in 2 kind of high-profile players. David Jones, I think, is a really good fit to fill that Julian Champagny role. But that backcourt of Posh Alexander and Andre Curbelo it's going to sink or swim. Like, it's going to either be really electric or St. John's fans are going to start turning off the TV real quick, because that's just kind of the duality you have with those 2 players. Lucas, what are you expecting? Are you expecting more of the highs or more of the lows that come with having Posh and Andre run the backcourt?
So this is why I shook my head kind of vehemently when Riley said that Seton Hall is the biggest variance in the league. Because St. John's can go in a lot of ways. I mean, they're going to go fast. They're going to have, and I think inconsistency is bound to happen with this group. But it's not game to game. Like, I think it's media timeout to media timeout. Honestly, I think that they're a really interesting group. I think that if it all comes together, they have the talent to be a top 4 team. I think they have a lot of talent in this group. I think losing Champagne is big. Aaron Wheeler was actually really good for them last year. That's a tough loss too. I think David Jones has obviously proven himself in the Big East. Had a bunch of really good games for DePaul last year. Curbelo, while has had his struggles, also there's a reason why people were so high on him coming into his sophomore year in Illinois. If he can regain some of that confidence, or tone down the confidence in some areas, I think that, and then pairing him with Posh Alexander, you got 2 really high-level passers in the backcourt, and I think Joe Soriano is ready for another big jump in the front court too. So I think there's a lot of pieces here. It's a matter of how well they all can really get together. How are they really going to get the pace for Mike Anderson's teams has always been there, but their defense really hasn't. They force turnovers, but when they haven't, they've given up a lot of really easy looks. Can they really lock down the rest of those gaps on defense? And do they have enough shooting is the biggest question for me. I mean, I don't really know. I mean, if you just run down their projected starting 5 for this year, Alexander shot 22% last year from 3, Curbelo 17%, Montes Mathis 26%, David Jones 30%, Soriano didn't hit one. Like that, they need shooting, and I think you'll get that with Dylan Day-Wooster coming back. But like, they need more shooting than that, and I think that's really the thing that's holding me back from feeling like they can really be a top 5 team. But they can surprise. They're fast. They're going to get after you on defense. If they force turnovers, if they make quality passes, they don't turn the ball over as much, I think they can be really, really, really interesting.
Riley, what are your thoughts on St. John's?
Yeah, I'm glad Lucas gave a little more in-depth analysis, because when I look at this Curbelo and Posh pairing, like, my mind immediately went to, like, back in 2018 the summer where LeBron signed with the Lakers and they brought in Rajon Rondo and Lance Stevenson as his supporting cast. And I think everybody was like, dude, you're really putting Rondo and Stevenson together, like two non-shooting threats. But it's like there's a world where, like, you know, if Lance Stevenson can get back to just relying on that dog in him to actually become a productive player, it's like maybe it could work. Maybe Rondo turns back the clock a little bit. It's true, but it's like you'd put Rondo and Lance Stevenson together if you were making a basketball team that you wanted to, like, win a fight with, but not if you want to win basketball games. And I can't help but feel a little bit about the same about Curbelo and Posh. And I know, like, Lucas touched on this. Like, I loved Curbelo going into last year. I was just so enthralled by his skill set as a freshman at Illinois when he was playing next to Io and was just able to throw no-look passes and be just like a wizard with the rock in his hands. But, yeah, and who knows, maybe it was all concussion-related last year and we get to see maybe that freshman year Curbelo was who he really is. But I don't know, man. That's like a huge gamble just putting him with Posh. So
well, I like the gamble, honestly. I mean, I think
I don't blame St. John's for doing it. It's
like really that core, Alexander, Curbelo, and Jones, it is a lot of talent packed in. If they go together, they can be really dangerous, I think.
It's one of those things where if it hits, it's going to be really fun to watch. But I feel like the chances that it hits are so low that you almost feel bad about kind of ranking them anywhere close to a top half team in the Big East, because it's just there are so many things that could go wrong with this team and so few avenues for it to go right.
Yeah, it's about as high of a chance of Lance Stevenson panning out for the Lakers. That's where
hey, I mean, while everyone else zigs, they will zag, and if chaos works.
Moving to a second-year head coach, Shaka Smart, loses Justin Lewis and Daryl Morcell at Marquette. But, you know, he brings in Zach Wrightsell from Loyola New Orleans. Going to be relying on some of his role players to step up into that starting rotation, because I don't know if there's enough there to really rely on any of the freshmen or Wrightsell to take up significant minutes, at least to start the season. Lucas, what are you expecting from Marquette in Smart's second season?
I'll be totally honest. I didn't expect a ton out of Marquette last year. And that was my mistake. I mean, I think they exceeded expectations. They were quite good. They made the NCAA tournament. But again, I'm coming into this season with questions, probably more so than I even had last year. Although Tyler Kolek, I think, is a really good playmaker. He'll probably shoot a lot better this year from three. I think he's a much better shooter than he showed last season. But I think it's kind of like you get rid of your two, not get rid of, I mean, I'm sure they would welcome Justin Lewis back if he was there. But they lose Justin Lewis and Daryl Morcell this offseason, and it's just, are there guys to fill into those starring roles is a legitimate question. And then if there are, if that's Omax Prosper or Cam Jones or Kolek taking out a bigger scoring role, then who fills into those roles that they filled last year? It's just kind of a trickle-down effect within their roster that I have reservations about really picking them to compete for an NCAA tournament bid. Obviously, Smart exceeded expectations last year, but they're going to need some guys to take some big steps. Shout out my high school, David Joplin. I think is ready for a nice jump. He might start this year. I really liked him in high school. That's totally my bias of rooting for my old high school. But I think that he can take a bigger step this year and play bigger minutes on the perimeter for them. Really fluid, 6'7", got a nice mid-range game, can stretch the floor. I think he's a nice piece at the three, next to Kolek, Jones, and Omax, who I think are a bit more proven.
Riley, it seems like whenever you give Shaka Smart expectations, and maybe it was just Texas, but whenever you give him expectations, he can never achieve them. But when he comes in as kind of the underdog, he does well with it. What are you expecting is the ceiling for Marquette this year? And do you think that they finish, you know, I want to say outside the bottom three, because I think the bottom two is pretty set in stone.
Mm-hmm. I I think they're a bottom 3 team. I think unless like the St. John's experiment goes like super south, I think Marquette probably edges them out for that bottom 3. It's like I know Shaka had no expectations last year going into the season, but at least like I mean Daryl Morcell was I guess he didn't show like that shot creation side that much at Maryland. He wasn't really asked to do a lot, and that kind of came out of nowhere. But at least you had a dude who was like the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year who clearly had a lot of talent. And I think Justin Lewis, even though he had some moments as a freshman, I don't know if anybody was really anticipating the breakout that he had last year where he averaged close to 18 a game. Maybe some people thought he could get close to that. But I'm just not really seeing any piece like that on this roster. Like, I mean, Omax Prosper's already been in college 2 years and hasn't really shown any sort of that like go-to scorer type skill set that I think that they relied. Oh yeah, I guess Jones would be like the best bet to sort of emerge as that, but yeah, I'm just. Yeah, I think like I mean, even looking at his KenPom page, Justin Lewis was 5th in the Big East last year in usage. Like that's a huge piece to lose, and I think. Even though Morcell didn't sustain it all year, kind of that high level, like 20-point per game story that scoring when he started the season on an absolute tear, like again, maybe like Lucas said, Cam Jones can probably give you some of that, but beyond him, I'm kind of struggling to see who gets that done.
I didn't put them last because I have them last in this group, Lucas. I put them last so that you could have the floor with them. The Butler Bulldogs bring in Thad Matta. It'll be his first year there. And they add what I think might be one of the more underrated transfer classes in the country. Eric Hunter, point guard coming in from Purdue. Monty Bates, one of the best defensive rebounding bigs in the country coming in from NC State. Ali from Akron. Jalen Thomas from Georgia State. 2 very solid mid-major players. I know you've been pretty high relative to, I think, the rest of the country on where Butler can finish. So why don't you take this moment to just try and convince everybody where you think Butler will finish and kind of why you think they'll finish there?
I think they're preseason 6th or 7th in the Big East. And I think on the bubble territory coming into the year. But I do think they have a pretty high ceiling just as things change. Because I really think, to your point on the transfer class, I think what it really does is it's one of the best classes that fits what Butler needed, like to a T almost. Like Butler's issues last season, like they couldn't protect the rim defensively. They added 2 of the top 15 guys available in the entire transfer portal for block rate. Like Jalen Thomas was 12th among all guys transferring between D1 teams last year, and Manny Bates would have ranked 7th 2 years ago. Obviously, they're going to miss Thomas with a pulmonary embolism probably for the first month and a half of the season, so that's a blow. But having Manny Bates changes the entire way Butler can defend inside. They've never really had a shot blocker of his caliber. I mean, he led the country in block rate as a true freshman at NC State, and then followed that up with another top 15 year as a sophomore. I think he changes the way that they can defend the inside. They had a good perimeter stopper in Aaron Thompson the last 5 years, but they bring in Eric Hunter Jr. to kind of fill that void as a guy who brings that same defensive tenacity. He was all defensive in the Big Ten last year. Plus, he's also a 44% three-point shooter, which leads into another big issue for Butler last season, which was three-point efficiency, where they shot a fair number of threes, but were worse than any team that made the NCAA tournament. I want to stay in the 330s nationally in three-point percentage. Eric Hunter shot 44% at Purdue last year. Ali, 6'8", fluid wing, who probably play the 4 for Butler, which is probably the biggest issue. He's not a great rebounding 4. They're going to need a lot of help on the glass in that department. Shot 41% from 3. He's a really good intermediate player. I think you look at guys who take that sophomore leap this year we've talked about with several teams. I think Butler's got 2 of those guys, Simas Lukosius and Jaden Taylor, which I think both of them had an argument to be on the all-freshman team last year. And if one of them didn't exist, the other one would have been on it. I think they both were probably that 7th or 8th at worst freshman in the conference last year. I think they step in. I think Butler obviously brings back Chuck Harris, back-to-back leading scorer. If he takes another jump, I think that there's talent here. I think that there's potential to be very good defensively with a group that starts Hunter, Ali, and Bates probably across those lines are really good defensively. I think there's pieces here. I think that they have the talent to be in the NCAA tournament next night. There's no denying that Thad Matta's been really good his whole career. And if he can really put things up to standard right away, they can be good.
Yeah, Riley, Thad Matta spent 1 year at Butler back in, I think, 2000, 2001, was coach of the year in what is now the Horizon League, was the MCC back then, spent 3 years at Xavier in the A10, did really well at Ohio State up until he had his health issues, which forced him to take a step back from basketball. But now he returns to Butler. So you've got two coaches in this conference that are returning to schools that they had previously coached in Sean Miller and Thad Matta. Two questions for you, Riley. What are you expecting from Butler this year in Thad Matta's first year back? But also thinking long term, which program is going to be better moving forward with their previous head coach? Xavier with Sean Miller or Butler with Thad Matta?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say I'll start with just looking ahead to this upcoming year. I think I sort of expect Butler to sneak into the tournament, and I'll say that as maybe it's just like Lucas rubbing off on me, and I want to see my friends succeed. What'd you say?
If you talk to the Butler fan base right now, I think I'm one of the most pessimistic, honestly.
But I think just like you being in my circle, I by proxy hear all this Butler propaganda, even if you're pessimistic, and that's got me thinking dude, Chuck Harris, my man, is about to contend for Big East Player of the Year. But I think Chuck Harris is a delight to watch. But this year in particular, I would expect that Butler defense to get right. I think looking at Thad's pedigree, I know it sort of slipped down his last his last few years at Ohio State, but he had a stretch in the 2010s where it was every year top 15 defense. And I think when you have someone like Manny Bates, who I followed throughout his career at NC State, he really does block everything, and they're not just cheap blocks either. They are emphatic blocks that take skill, that take instincts, that take timing, and all of that. And I think that he should be a monster in this league. Now I would defer to Lucas on how the perimeter guys are around him. I know Eric Hunter is a good defender and will be good at the point of attack, but I would guess at least with Jaden Taylor and Simas Lukosius, those dudes at least have the size to be disruptive. Okay. Yeah.
Taylor's a really good defender. Simas has his moments. I think he's just a little bit slow sometimes. And Ali was a good defender at Akron. Can probably defend 2 through 4. But we missed him. We didn't get to see him play on Butler's Italian, Italy and Greece trip. Both both missed. They were both on the trip. They just did not play.
Gotcha. Yeah, and with Butler too, it's a program that has had a history of having good defenses. That wouldn't be something that is out of the blue for a program like Butler to be, one of the best defenses in the league. So I think maybe they won't be I don't know. I kind of struggle to see Butler being much lower than the 4th best defense in the league this year, just sort of with what they have on the interior, with Thad Matta's pedigree, and some of the upside they have on the perimeter there. So that would be one of the main things I'm looking for.
The big thing for me, honestly, with Thad Matta is just he's so much different than the Butler coaches have been recently in style. Brad Stevens was awesome. Nobody's going to dispute that fact. At Butler, but he was slow. They ran a slow offense. They were a slow overall tempo team. Chris Holtman was the same. LaVale Jordan was the same, even when they were his really good teams, because LaVale had some really good teams. I think that as you come into Thad, he's played quite fast at Ohio State. His adjusted tempo numbers don't say so, but you got a little bit deeper. His offensive tempo has always been pretty quick, and now they add in a shot blocker on defense. I think whether or not Butler is good, I don't know. We'll see. I think we'll actually get a pretty good idea pretty early this season. But will they be drastically different? I think yes. I think their style of play will be very different. I think they'll be more They'll be more athletic, at least in the front court defensively, and I think they'll look to get out and run more offensively, which I think will give an entirely different brand of basketball than Butler's really shown in the past, even during really good seasons.
Yeah, and then as far as that second question about who's better long term between Xavier and Butler, my way to get out of this question would to say if my UNC Tar Heels are stuck in the ACC and the Big Ten or SEC doesn't poach them due to TV deals and whatnot, and I want the ACC to be good, Sean Miller's leaving after this year to take over for Jeff Capel at Pitt. And finally making Pitt something. So if that's the case, then I'll go with that because I expect him to be there longer. But how would you answer that, Luke? Well, maybe I want to hear from Connor first before we hear from Lucas.
I agree with you, and I don't think it's because Sean Miller gets poached. I think I just trust Thad Matta to elevate a program for a longer period of time than Sean Miller. Like, granted, I understand that this year Xavier has a ton of talent returning. Sean Miller's a great coach. But if we're being honest with ourselves, like, he was good at Arizona, but I don't feel like he elevated Arizona above where you would think kind of the middle of the floor and ceiling for Arizona should be. And Thad Matta had such a consistent time everywhere he went up until like the last 3 years at Ohio State that I just trust him to build a program more than Sean Miller. But I do think this year and maybe the next couple of years, Xavier is going to look better than Butler. But whether Sean Miller or Thad Matta stay at Xavier and Butler, I don't know. I just know that I kind of trust Thad Matta to put together a program that can sustain success a little bit better than Sean Miller.
I mean, it would make a lot more sense to assume Thad is there till the end of his career, just with his ties there, with like him going there, his wife going there, kids going there, and just with the fact he's been retired for the last 3 or 4 years. Like, I don't really think he. Oh right, I forgot he was in that what was like a consultant type role or something.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, I feel like you don't come out of retirement to take a head coaching job. I mean, unless it has that sentimental value for one, and unless that you like plan on finishing your career there for two.
That is fair. There's 2 more teams we have to touch on.
Do we have to?
Yeah, 2 more, Lucas. Tony Stubblefield, second season at DePaul in his first year. They did not finish last, but they lose Javon Friedman-Liberty. They lose David Jones, obviously, to St. John's. Brandon Johnson. They bring in Umoja Gibson.
They bring in Caleb Murphy and Mo Gibson. Let's rock. There are some fun pieces on this team. Okay, that is a fun starting backcourt. I think Caleb Murphy's really good. I think I've always been a Mo Gibson fan. And I think Nick Ongenda's coming back in the front court. They bring Jalen Terry, maybe off the bench this year, former Oregon guy, former almost Mr. Basketball in Michigan. I think, why not? Let's have a blast. I think DePaul's got some fun pieces, man.
All right.
Why not? Why not?
You get
rank DePaul and do it now.
You got to sell me on Caleb Murphy being quote unquote really good. I mean, the man has had a sub 90 offensive rating in his first 2 seasons. Turnover machine. Are you just blaming that on South Florida?
We're gonna hype DePaul, and if good things happen for DePaul this season, it'll be Caleb Murphy putting his first above 90 offensive rating together.
Let's go, Caleb. I believe in you.
I think he's good. I think he'll play with Mo Gibson really well. I think Gibson gives them another shooter who's really proven. I think that there's some intrigue here. Now, I don't think they escaped the bottom 2, but let's be honest. DePaul has not had the most fun over the last years. In fact, I'm not sure they've had fun post-January in several years. But it's a new offseason. It's a new season. Let's just be optimistic for everybody. Let's go Blue Demons.
I kind of thought the opposite, just like looking at that backcourt. Maybe it will be fun, but it's just like, it just seems like one of those, like a transfer class that's like, I don't know, might as well just throw it at a wall and see what sticks. Like,
no Mo Gibson slander. He's a baller.
It's funny because
I know you guys
I think
so much DePaul hype from me at like 11 o'clock at night.
Well, I mean, when it compared, like, when I'm looking at DePaul, you know, my default is put him last. But, man, I am so done with Patrick Ewing. Like, I wanted him to be so good at Georgetown, and they followed up sneaking into the NCAA tournament by winning 0 games last year in the Big East. They have to replace everybody. And, like, unlike DePaul, where I agree with you, Lucas, like, I can see how the pieces at DePaul fit together. What is Georgetown doing with this roster? Like, Brandon Murray's okay. Primo Spears is okay. Jay Heath is okay. Judith Wahab is okay. But, like, I don't...
He was really good at Georgetown his sophomore year.
Yeah. I love a cook. I really like a cook. I wish he went literally anywhere other than Georgetown. Like,
I think a cook together can be fun. I think it's a pretty good fun. I think it's a pretty fun forward card. They're big.
I just don't
stretch the floor. Wahab can block shots. He'll finish inside. He was good in the Big East.
I'm with Connor though.
Together.
Yeah,
team very much. I just think that why not?
The whole Pat Ewing thing is so wild just because he was like really well respected in NBA coaching circles because he was on an NBA bench for however many years and was rumored to be in contention for head coaching jobs too. And for him to just like, for Georgetown to be the disaster it is, I mean, I don't have any.
They will not be 0-19 again this year.
I mean, that's pretty.
No, they'll win at home against DePaul.
They'll also play 20 Big East games this year.
Yeah.
Lucas, do you have any thoughts on Bryson Mazzone while we're talking about Georgetown? Little USC upstate transfer. Shout out to the Big South.
Not particularly. I think he's probably a decent bench guy for them this year. I think honestly Georgetown is a team that's a collection of talent that I'm intrigued to see what happens with. Maybe more so than anybody in the league. Am I just like not really sure what to think of what the talent necessarily does here? But there is talent. They definitely upgraded talent, even losing Muhammad. I think they've upgraded some of the talent this year. I think Brandon Murray is quite good. Dante Harris and Primo Spears, maybe neither one is an elite point guard in the league, but if those two guys are picking up all your point guard minutes, they're both pretty good.
I think I'm just kind of alarmed. Like, remember how much hype there was around Dante Harris after that Big East tournament run? Where it was like, oh, this dude's a beast defender, like he's the future. And again, like looking at our ALMANAC previews, I'm guessing Patrick Ewing to Rob Doster, he expects Primo Spears, a Duquesne transfer. I'll say that again, like who won 8 games last year, a Duquesne transfer starting over Dante Harris. I think that's the biggest red flag to me is like, yo, like that's where I'm like, even though as much as I love a cook and as much as I want to see my Big South guys like Bryson Mazzone shine, that's where it's like, will these pieces fit? Is there anything here? Like, yeah.
Thing is this, I'll say with regards to Georgetown, at the very worst, they're gonna be better than they were last year. They will threaten more teams in the league. No, I'm serious. I mean, I think that like the 0-19 team that they were last year, in terms of the overall look of the Big East, sunk some of the team's metrics overall. It's just not a very good win. And it's a dangerous place to play. Like even a close win kind of hurts metrics wise. I think that they'll be better this year. I think they're probably in the range of winning 4 to 6, 7 Big East games. I'd probably say the same about DePaul. I think the bottom of the league is just straight up better this year. Like I know I was kind of jokingly excited for DePaul, but because I need to be. But I think the bottom of the league it was really bad last year. I think Butler was pretty bad. Georgetown was obviously the bottom, and DePaul was better, but still not good. I think that those teams, particularly Butler of that group, but they had a bigger offseason change than these other two teams. But I think the bottom of the league will be better 8 through 11.
So it's time for the second to last segment of all our previews. I'll go to Lucas first. Can you give me your 1 through 11 projected rankings?
Okay. Creighton 1. I'll go Nova 2. 3 UConn, 4 Xavier, 5 Providence. My brain says 6 Seton Hall. My heart says Butler 6. But I'll go Seton Hall 6, Butler 7, St. John's 8, Marquette 9, Georgetown 10, DePaul 11.
Riley?
Yeah, I had Creighton 1, UConn 2, Nova 3, Xavier 4, Providence 5, Butler 6, Seton Hall 7, St. John's 8, Marquette 9, Georgetown 10, DePaul 11.
So I will start off this bold prediction segment with my projected standings. Villanova still at 1, Creighton 2, UConn 3, Xavier 4, Providence 5, Seton Hall 6, Butler 7, St. John's, Marquette, DePaul, Georgetown. But my bold prediction is I think Creighton's going to have the better resume because I think they're going to start the season better. But I think by the time we reach Big East play, Villanova is going to be Villanova. And I feel like Villanova wins the conference regular season title outright. Riley, your bold prediction for the Big East.
All right, bold prediction. Let's go. I'm going to say, Mark Armstrong emerges steady right off the bat, gives Nova a good 15 points per game, even inverts the offense a little bit, posts up, but more importantly, also throws down some nasty dunks because that dude's super bouncy. So I'm going to say he kind of breaks that mold where it's not just Cam Whitmore who's sort of shattering the whole freshmen don't shine at Villanova expectations. It's also Mark Armstrong. Comes in averages close to 15 points a game.
Lucas?
I have no idea. I'm trying to think I'm trying to think of what I really think is a bold prediction here.
Chuck, player of the year.
No,
Say it.
No. I kind of want to say no. I don't like it. I don't know if I like it's hard because I've written so much about this league this year that I'm not even sure what really classifies as bold anymore.
It doesn't have to be bold. It just has to be different. You know, what do you think is going to happen that maybe not a lot of people think will happen?
I think Butler has a top 2 defense in the league. Top 3 defense in the league. I think the top 3 defenses in order are Creighton, Seton Hall, Butler.
Okay.
How about that?
That's perfect.
Go on and put them at 2. Put them ahead of Seton Hall.
I really like Seton Hall's potential, I'm not going to lie.
Well, that's going to do it for us. Thank you guys for listening. Thanks, Lucas, for joining us. You can find all our socials down in the description below if you're on YouTube. You can find us on YouTube. Subscribe if you're on YouTube or any of the other podcast applications. Make sure you subscribe to us so that you know when our next podcasts come in. Brian's usually the one doing this, so I'm going to ramble on for a little bit. But also, buy the Almanac. The season's not here yet. It's not too late to buy the Almanac. All the information's, for the most part, is still good, with the exception of kind of late injuries and stuff like that. But, you know, every publication is not current on those. So buy the Almanac. We're really proud of it. We know that the people over at Field of 68, Breeman Weave, and Burble Commits are also really proud of it. And we will talk to you next time with some of the better mid-majors in the country. And so with that, I'm Connor Hope for my co-host Riley Davis and Lukas Harkins. Thanks for listening.
Basketball, college. Basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa, basketball, college. Come on. Basketball, college. Oh. Basketball, college. Whoa, basketball, college.